In 1980, in the stark beauty of a Canadian winter, Shredded-Cason arrives in the town of Dalbeau, Quebec.
I knew about winter from the movies, that snow fell. But to come here and touch the winter.
Shredded-Cason lost his father and brother in Cambodia's killing fields. He is part of a tide of refugees to find sanctuary in Canada. Just before Christmas, in this northern Quebec region, residents raise $125,000 in a single day. The small town of Dalbeau welcomes 100 refugees. Marie Potvin and Marcel Fortin open their home.
I told myself we are a big country. We have space for a lot of people. Why not them? They are working people, they want to live, and they are proud.
In the years ahead, the refugees will become part of Canada, new citizens of a country learning to define itself in a new way. This is a time of revolutionary change, of winners and losers. Old enemies and fresh longings threaten to divide the country. And soaring global visions promise dramatic change.
The future of Canada is at stake. I need your help.
Canadians will launch a rights revolution. Mary Eberts will help transform the place of women.
If governments do not see our place and our voice in their assemblies, it is up to women to bring the point home.
Elizabeth May will begin a national crusade from her kitchen table.
It was their job, and it was our life.
And Baltej Singh Dhillon will challenge the very image of Canada.
And how we do as a country is going to be judged globally.
In an uncertain world, there is upheaval and opportunity. In the backcountry of Alberta in the mid-1970s, a treasure hunt is on. As turbulent politics in the Middle East drive up oil prices, Alberta's resources are more valuable than ever. For geologist Jim Gray, these are the glory days.
Let's drill that well. Let's take that land. Let's not talk about this for the rest of the day. And let's not have a bloody committee. And if we fail, we'll fail big. But if we win, we're gonna win big.
Gray's company, Canadian Hunter, hits the jackpot.
It was a great moment of self-satisfaction, especially when you find it, where everyone said not to go.
Adventurers fan out across the province, digging into the earth, hoping for a lucky strike. Other provinces watch with envy as Alberta booms. 4,000 people a month flood into the province, looking for a share of this modern-day gold rush. For a while, it seems as though money really does grow on trees. At Calgary's Petroleum Club, new Canadian millionaires rub shoulders with American oil company presidents. The big players swap tales and make deals. Jim Gray thrives on the energy.
Everybody wanted to be in a big building. Everybody wanted to have a corporate airplane. Young people with 3 or 4 years' experience were getting together with some other friends and starting their own oil and gas company.
But as Albertans revel in the good times, Premier Peter Lougheed prepares for battle with a formidable opponent. He's clashed with Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau before.
He said that as far as he was concerned, the resources didn't belong to the provinces, they belonged to all Canadians. Don't you think that's reason enough for us to be concerned?
Ottawa and Alberta are heading for a showdown about who controls Canada's energy resources. Late into the autumn nights of 1980, a small team in Trudeau's energy ministry is working on a sweeping plan.
On behalf of my colleague, the Minister of Energy, Mines and Resources, I am tabling tonight the Government of Canada's National Energy Program.
Albertans can't believe what they're hearing. With the National Energy Program, Ottawa takes control. The federal government will ensure that all Canadian provinces share Alberta's wealth. Ottawa will encourage Canadian oil and gas exploration from sea to sea, and it will favor national companies over foreign firms. The government calls it a made-in-Canada solution. Albertans are outraged.
Ottawa government has, without negotiation, without agreement, simply walked into our home and occupied the living room.
Lougheed strikes back. He cuts oil production to slow down shipments to central Canada. Protesting the Canadianization of the industry, some American rigs pack up.
I was wondering what you thought of the federal government's energy policy.
You want me to give it to you in my own words or something that sucks?
Jim Gray is furious about the threat to his industry.
It is unraveling before our eyes. It is being torn apart by vandals.
That winter, some angry Albertans talk of separation from Canada.
We used to be very proud to be Canadians out here, and now that pride is gone because we feel we don't matter.
Small political parties form. Their theme is the same. Ottawa will not dictate to the West.
Western independence is our only chance to stay.
After months of negotiations, Trudeau and Lougheed hammer out a truce. But the agreement comes too late. Suddenly, oil prices are tumbling. As unpredictably as it began, the boom is over. But Westerners don't blame world markets or the looming recession. They blame the NEP and Ottawa. In the years that follow, bitterness against the East grows. In the mid-'80s, Jim Gray hosts a meeting in his office with a politician who pledges bold action. Gray soon signs on with Preston Manning's Reform Party, a political movement promising to make Western voices count. In his Montreal apartment, Laurent Leclerc imagines a utopian future for his infant son. He dreams of 3-month-old Benjamin growing up in a magnificent new country called Quebec.
We were hoping for something different, a different country. Warmer, more open to the world. And to give that kind of country to our children, that's extraordinary.
Laurent Leclerc celebrated the Parti Québécois victory in 1976. Now, 4 years later, René Lévesque's government will hold an extraordinary referendum. The carefully constructed question asks permission to begin negotiations on sovereignty with an economic association with Canada. Quebecers feel they must search their souls and choose their country, Canada or Quebec.
That there must be a loyalty to Canada before there's a loyalty to any one province.
Laurent Leclerc's parents are firmly against sovereignty. Liane and Jean Leclerc hope their grandson grows up in a united Canada. With passionate conviction on opposite sides, the Leclerc family keenly follows the referendum campaign.
D'en arriver avec le reste du Canada à une nouvelle entente fondée sur le principe de l'égalité des peuples.
For the first time, proceedings are televised from the National Assembly. With a masterful performance early on, the Parti Québécois pulls ahead in the polls. René Lévesque's common touch draws fervent support. Lévesque knows his main challenge will come from a man he's known for 25 years, Pierre Trudeau. But for now, his adversary keeps a low profile.
We insisted, in addition to speaking the language of reasons, I've tried to do tonight in...
The No campaign, led by Quebec Liberal leader Claude Ryan, fails to arouse much passion. Watching from Ottawa, Trudeau sends in reinforcements. His spirited Justice Minister, Jean Chrétien.
La vérité va sortir, et la vérité, pour nous, c'est la liberté. C'est un Québec fort dans un Canada uni. Merci beaucoup et bon mot.
That spring, across the province, Quebecers passionately debate oui or non.
Vous donnez des cadeaux comme ça gratuits à tout le monde qui tend la main? Non. Hein? Mais si le fédéral passe son temps à nous donner de l'argent, qui nous fiche la paix, on va s'arranger tout seul. À eux de l'utiliser. Qu'ils gardent leur argent. On n'en veut pas de leur argent.
On peut continuer de rester avec le Canada. Hein?
Mais pourquoi? Qu'est-ce que c'est le Canada pour vous? Dites-moi ce que c'est.
Tout ce qu'on a aujourd'hui, tout ce qui nous revient, les pensions, protéger un peu, surtout. Hein?
In the rest of the country, too, Quebec's referendum stirs up strong opinion.
Go ahead. I think I speak for a lot of people here in BC and Western Canada. It's got to the point that who cares, you know? So they leave. Big deal. They've cost us enough money.
I'm calling from Newfoundland.
I personally think that it would be heartbreaking for Canada to break up, because I think a yes vote is the beginning of the end.
Mais on peut gagner, on doit gagner, on va gagner.
As referendum day draws closer, support for the oui side is dropping. And then a Parti québécois cabinet minister stumbles.
Yvette, sa petite sœur, est joyeuse et gentille. Je vous prierai d'écouter, ça va vous faire du bien.
Lise Payette, a high-profile feminist, belittles women who support the no side by implying they are submissive Yvettes. It's interpreted as an insult to all homemakers. The no side quickly seizes the opportunity, filling the Montreal Forum with supporters. The Yvette rally is a huge boost for the Federalist campaign. And then, just a week before the vote, the Prime Minister weighs in with one of the most powerful speeches of his career.
Bien sûr, mon nom est Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Oui, Elliott, c'était le nom de ma mère, voyez-vous? C'est ça, les Elliott. Puis mon nom est québécois, mon nom est canadien aussi. Puis c'est ça, mon nom.
It is at this rally that Trudeau makes a historic pledge.
Et nous vous disons, à vous des autres provinces, que nous n'accepterons pas ensuite que ce nom soit interprété par vous comme une indication que tout va bien puis que tout peut rester comme c'était par avant. Nous voulons du changement, nous mettons nos sièges en jeu pour avoir du changement.
Many Quebecers interpret this as a promise of fundamental change to Confederation. But Trudeau doesn't spell out what he has in mind. Referendum Day, May 20th. There is a massive turnout at the polls. At 7 o'clock, Laurent Leclerc and his wife Ginette watch eagerly.
It was the evening of the century, the evening of my life. I said to Ginette, let's go to the Paul Sauvé Arena. We must go to the Paul Sauvé Arena.
By the time Laurent Leclerc arrives at the Paul Sauvé Center, the oui side is behind.
Le oui 106 678, le non 131 960.
At the no headquarters, victory is delivered within the hour. They win with close to 60% of the vote. Laurent's mother, Leanne, is meeting her husband at the local no headquarters.
I had just heard that we won, so I expected the place to be euphoric.
Instead, Leanne Leclerc finds her husband stricken. He's just seen their son, Laurent, on television.
Our son was crying because he lost. And we were happy because we won. Couldn't be totally happy. Our son was crying.
Si je vous ai bien compris, vous êtes en train de dire à la prochaine fois.
For René Lévesque and Pierre Trudeau, another battle looms. But first, both men must turn their attention to a faltering economy. A summer evening in 1981. At the Gladstone Hotel in downtown Toronto, workers from the Inglis appliance factory gather after their shift. No one here realizes these are the last days of a way of life.
It's not really much that I think of, but on the 600th time, at 2 every minute.
Workers on the Inglis line make a good wage, but they can't keep up with spiraling inflation anymore. Union President Mike Hirsch is worried.
Everything just went crazy. Prices were ridiculous. Inflation was through the roof. Life changed in 1981.
Interest rates climb higher to fight inflation, up to 29% on credit cards, up to 22% on mortgages. Like many Canadians, Lise and Roger Ricard of Valleyfield, Quebec, are falling behind. When their mortgage payments almost double, they're forced to sell their house for less than they owe on it.
Très mal. Parce que quand on commence à s'acheter une maison, c'est pour se bâtir une famille, puis vivre pour le restant de nos jours. Puis une journée à l'autre, ils disent t'as plus ta maison, ça fait quelque chose.
The country, the whole industrialized world, is in the grip of a crushing recession. In Chilliwack, British Columbia, the slump hits hard.
The politicians are telling us, you know, we know that you may lose your job because of tight money. We know that you may lose your home because of tight money. You know, we know you may be next to starving because of tight money policy. But we know what we know what we're doing, so have faith. Well, you know, here it is. This is a company that'll never come back.
Unemployment hasn't been this high since the Depression. In Winnipeg, finding work is a daily struggle.
Sometimes I just feel like going back up north. So maybe I'll just go back up there. Maybe I'll have a better chance.
For many days and many nights, I've been walking on the picket line.
The climate is getting tougher for unions, too. There's no longer enough for both business and labor to do well.
I got my friends.
In 1983, when Mike Hirsch defiantly leads a strike, negotiations are markedly different.
The unions were on the run, and management went for the jugular. Management became far more aggressive, and the unions far more intimidated and defensive than they had been before.
It's a cruel time to be on strike. Eddie Muir takes shifts at a supermarket to make ends meet. Dave Parker borrows from his brother to scrape by. Some strikers even petition to go back to work. After 39 painful days, it's over. No gains, but the workers have kept their jobs for now. Everywhere in Canada, a tough new attitude is taking hold. The stage is set for conflict, a clash of values that will define the 1980s. In the summer of 1983, the Vancouver punk band DOA rehearses in its East Side basement studio. The band has a growing counterculture reputation for its spiky protest songs.
We're tired of working. We're tired of working, yeah, working for nothing. We all want what we got coming. All we need is our break.
These lyrics are directed at Premier Bill Bennett, known in the province as Tough Guy. As British Columbians suffer through the recession, Bennett embraces the ideas of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and American President Ronald Reagan. Like them, he wants to cut back the social welfare state and encourage private enterprise.
The country had lost its sense of values. There was no way out. You couldn't sugarcoat it. We had to take it on the chin.
Budget calls for major change.
The Social Credit government launches 26 pieces of legislation. They drastically curtail union rights, slash social programs, and cut the civil service. On July 7th, Renata Shearer's job with the Human Rights Commission disappears, along with the commission itself.
Our reaction to this crisis and attack was first fear, then confusion, and finally outrage and movement.
What do we want?
Democracy!
When do we want it?
Now!
Renata Shearer becomes one of the leaders of a rapidly organized coalition known as Solidarity. The movement calls for a general strike.
And I'm not usually a radical or militant type, but I think that these bills call for that.
It's the biggest social protest British Columbia has seen, but Bill Bennett has approval from many in the private sector, like businessman Jimmy Pattison.
We were really down on our knees in the early 80s here, and it was the restraint program and the policies of the government that made a major contribution in helping turn this thing around out here.
Other governments watch closely. The Trade Minister of Ontario, Frank Miller, believes British Columbia will be a bellwether.
If Bennett succeeds, I think every government will end up doing the same thing, in its own way. Either way, there's an awful lot riding on what happens out there.
In Quebec, too, people are on the street. In the tough 1980s, even governments seen as socially progressive take harsh steps. René Lévesque rolls back wages for more than 1 million public sector workers. Across the country, people react angrily to restraint. In Vancouver, DOA quickly releases a single urging British Columbians to act. Proceeds go to Solidarity. But protest and strike action fail to stop Bill Bennett's juggernaut. When some labor leaders make a deal with government, they are accused of caving in. Few of Solidarity's demands are met. The day the deal is announced, Renata Shearer stays outside in a friend's car and weeps. Pierre Trudeau is the first Canadian Prime Minister to have an official photographer. It's a dream job for 31-year-old Robert Cooper.
I was still looking at myself as this little kid from Niagara Falls, and here I am hobnobbing around the world.
In the 4.5 years he will shadow the Prime Minister, Robert Cooper will take more than 160,000 photographs.
I got to know him visually so well that I could tell what kind of sleep he had that night.
In the dark room, Robert Cooper sees images of confidence. In the summer of 1981, Pierre Trudeau is at the height of his political power. Incredibly, just a year earlier, it seemed his political career was over. Conservative leader Joe Clark was elected with a minority government, but after just 9 months, Trudeau made a triumphant comeback.
Well, welcome to the 1980s.
He followed with victory in the Quebec referendum.
He was a man that knew what he wanted and would go after it. He would just relentlessly stay on something.
In the summer of 1981, Trudeau turns his focus toward a long-held goal, bringing home the Canadian Constitution.
We will try once more to get unanimous consent of the provinces to bring it home. But failing that, we'll appeal to the people of Canada to make a decision, and we will bring it home with their support.
Trudeau is determined to bring home a revised constitution so Canadians no longer need Great Britain's approval to change it. And he wants to give Canadians their own Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Only Richard Hatfield of New Brunswick and Bill Davis of Ontario support Trudeau. The other premiers form an alliance against him, soon known as the Gang of Eight. The gang is united by one goal: forcing Trudeau to negotiate. They fear a loss of provincial power.
Faced with a common front of 8 provinces out of 10, Trudeau didn't stand a chance, as long as everyone stuck to his guns and respected his signature.
The Gang of Eight mounts a fierce challenge, fighting Trudeau all the way to the Supreme Court. The Prime Minister is compelled to negotiate one more time in a dramatic game of high-stakes politics. On the morning of November 2nd, 1981, Robert Cooper prepares for the last chance meeting in Ottawa. Most of the premiers oppose Trudeau's Charter of Rights. They fear it will transfer power from elected politicians to unelected judges. René Lévesque's major demand is financial compensation for provinces opting out of federal programs. It's a way to get control in more and more areas. Robert Cooper is the only photographer allowed behind closed doors as the talks unfold. For 2 days, the Gang of Eight works hard to hold together. On the 3rd day, with no deal in sight, Trudeau pitches one last proposal.
Why don't we get patriation first? Nobody can object to that. Then give ourselves 2 years to solve our problems over the amending formula and that charter, and failing that, consult the people in a referendum.
Lévesque feels the challenge is directed at him.
In an insinuating and provocative tone, Trudeau pushed me to the wall. "You, the great Democrat," he said, "don't tell me you're afraid to fight." At the time, he seemed really sincere. "All right," I said.
The other premiers are horrified. The last thing they want is a referendum because they know Trudeau has Canadians on his side. The unity of the gang is collapsing.
So we have a new alliance between the Quebec government and the Canadian government. And the cat is among the pigeons.
Trudeau goes home that night. The Quebec delegation returns to its hotel across the river in Hull. Most of the other premiers head across the street to the Chateau Laurier Hotel. That night, in the hotel's rooms and hallways, there are anxious gatherings. Jean Chrétien, Ontario's Roy McMurtry, and Saskatchewan's Roy Romano work desperately for a compromise. They discuss diluting Trudeau's Charter of Rights, allowing provinces to override some sections of the Charter. Trudeau has already rejected this watering down. But during the night, Chrétien, Romano, and McMurtry lock in the final agreement. It includes the override Trudeau hates. Bill Davis convinces a reluctant Trudeau he has to take it if he wants a deal. The late-night bargaining includes another change, dropping Lévesque's prized compensation from the opting-out clause. Lévesque, across the river in Hull, is not informed. The Gang of Eight meets regularly for breakfast. When Lévesque arrives late the next morning, there is a document by his plate. It's the deal the others have agreed to.
We had been betrayed, in secret, by men who hadn't hesitated to tear up their own signatures, and without their even taking the trouble to warn us.
Robert Cooper captures the celebration. -1.
When the actual signing came down, Lévesque just got up, didn't say anything, got up from his chair, spun around, and walked out.
Cooper hurries after Lévesque. He snaps one photograph.
In my mind, what this picture has done is captured a whole province's feeling in one picture.
Oui, j'en ai une, mais très brève. In spite of the joyous outpourings of most of my colleagues while they were giving their reactions to that, maybe second thoughts and further events will make them understand that this could have incalculable consequences.
The other delegations will say they acted in good faith that night to reach a deal. But in Quebec, it will become known as the Night of the Long Knives. On April 17, 1982, Robert Cooper captures a moment in Canadian history. In a very few years, the Charter of Rights will transform Canadian society. Pierre Trudeau makes his mark on history. But on the day the new Constitution is signed, there is a powerful symbol of struggle still to come. René Lévesque orders the Quebec flag to be flown at half-staff.
When I was little, I dreamed of doing things with action. I wanted to be a fireman. You can save lives. Much later, I wanted to be an astronaut when I saw them go to the moon. I was always interested in science. I wanted to explain things, to understand how and why they worked.
Growing up in a small Quebec town in the 60s, Sylvie Gagnon's dreams were not encouraged. In school, she would be steered toward the arts, not the science subjects she loved. But in the 70s and 80s, changes are beginning to happen for women like Sylvie. changes that will bring both hard-won victories and unimaginable sorrow. Mary Eberts is coming of age during these times. She's a young professor in Toronto forging new ground in women's law. In 1973, Eberts hears of a divorce case that will outrage women across the country. An Alberta farm wife named Irene Murdoch is claiming half the family cattle ranch in her divorce. For 25 years, alongside her husband, she worked their 480 acres in the Turner Valley.
I would do the haying, stacking, sweeping, running to town for repairs and gas and oil. I just thought when you went into a marriage, it was a partnership basis, 50-50.
But the Supreme Court rules that it is her husband's farm. For a lifetime of work, Irene Murdoch is given just $200 a month. Mary Eberts blames an out-of-date legal system. She is convinced that only new laws will protect the rights of women like Irene Murdoch. She will soon have a chance to act on this belief. Across the country, other women are demanding change. In Woodstock, Ontario, Lee Lakeman opens one of the first battered women's shelters. Soon there are shelters in cities and towns across the country. Sandra Lovelace marches to Ottawa with women and children from the Tabique Reserve in New Brunswick. They're demanding equal treatment under the Indian Act.
Not the church and not the state. Women must control their fate. Not the church.
Carolyn Egan demonstrates in Toronto for unrestricted access to abortion. Diana Yaros from Montreal is on her first annual Take Back the Night march to confront violence against women. Sylvie Gagnon is now a young woman. She's been influenced by feminist ideas and is moving closer to her dream of a career in science. She takes a class in mechanical drafting.
Women were beginning to break into these careers. It wasn't necessarily encouraged, but it wasn't bluntly discouraged either. We were maybe seen as a bit of a curiosity, nothing more than that.
Mary Eberts is buried in her law books, searching for ways to give women the protection they want. In 1980, as Pierre Trudeau unveils his new Charter of Rights, she doesn't like what she sees. Mary Eberts wants full equality for women guaranteed in the Charter. So do many other women, but the government resists their participation in the process.
If governments do not see our place and our voice in their assemblies, it is up to women to bring the point home.
More than 1,000 determined women converge in Ottawa, quickly organizing their own conference, demanding equality be written into the Charter, forcing the government to pay attention.
The next time a cabinet minister of the government tries to tell women to go home and shut up, they'll think twice about it.
The women are victorious. Equality is enshrined in the Charter of Rights. The Charter soon becomes an instrument for change. In 1985, Native women who'd been denied equal rights under the Indian Act win full status under the Charter. And in 1988, the Charter is key in a high-profile case which throws out Canada's law against abortion. In this decade of tumultuous change, more and more women are moving into areas once considered the domain of men.
I, Bertha Wilson,
do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear.
In 1989, Sylvie Gagnon is one of a growing number of women who have decided to become engineers.
The world was opening up before me. I was convinced that the world was mine.
On Sylvie's last day of classes at Montreal's École Polytechnique, a 25-year-old man enters the school carrying a rifle. He believes feminists have ruined his life. On a deadly rampage through the school, he kills 14 women and himself. A bullet grazes Sylvie Gagnon.
I felt I was living in pure horror. It was too incredible. It was too unfair. It was too sick.
The shock and sorrow are intense across the country. But the worst mass shooting in Canada engenders a bitter debate.
I'm especially trying to understand the violence inside the men. Why the men particularly?
No, what the men killed was a poor, was very sick, you know.
Yes, but the thing is that, is it the reflect of a society, of the men in the society, or is it an isolated act?
This is isolated act. Is not the phenomenon of society is impossible. We'll be in the war.
I keep seeing those girls, and I feel that what this man did, he was a maniac, but it's just a magnification of what is happening to women all the time.
In the aftermath of the tragedy, groups form to raise awareness about violence against women. A campaign led by a Polytechnique student will lead to Canada's toughest gun control laws. And Canada will have a day of remembrance each December 6th. A year after the massacre, more women than ever enroll in engineering. Sylvie Gagnon, now a graduate of École Polytechnique, gets a job in the telecommunications division at Hydro-Québec, the department's first female engineer. For generations, Canada has opened its doors to immigrants. White immigrants.
That I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada and fulfill my duties as a Canadian citizen.
The country's discriminatory laws change in the 1960s and 70s, and that changes the look of Canada. At Toronto's Inglis factory, there are new faces on the assembly lines.
Up to that point, it was primarily Scottish, Irish, you know. That's what Toronto plants looked like then.
Now, Mike Hirsch's union communiques are translated into 9 languages. Pauline Flemings from Jamaica gets a job on the dryer line. She makes friends at the plant, but finds that not everyone in her new city is welcoming.
I would call up and ask if the apartment was vacant. And at first, they would say yes. But by the end of the conversation, suddenly the apartment wouldn't be available. And if you called an hour later or the following day, they would tell you it was still vacant.
In 1983, 16-year-old Baltej Singh Dillon arrives in Vancouver. He quickly learns the rules of high school.
I think I may have taken all of 5 minutes before realizing that how am I going to get rid of my brown skin? How am I going to get rid of my brown eyes? It was a moment of survival. Survival for my soul, for my spirit, for who I was.
Baltej Dillon's lesson in survival is preparation for what lies ahead. His career plan will challenge the limits of Canada's acceptance. Dillon wants to become a Canadian police officer in the country's elite force.
There is pride in the newly won right to wear the scarlet tunic of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police symbolize Canada to the world, a fitting image for a country that values peace, order, and good government. For many people, the uniform is one tangible symbol of an elusive Canadian identity. The broad-brimmed hat is a mandatory part of the uniform. But Baltej Dillon has a proud symbol of his own, the turban he wears every day.
Is somebody really asking me to protect a tradition? Or are they asking me to sacrifice my religion, my principles, my disciplines, my respect in my community, the respect that I have from my family?
The RCMP dress code is under review. Dillon may train wearing his turban, but there is no guarantee he'll be allowed to wear it as a Mountie. As politicians deliberate, Canadians speak out.
What they have to do is adapt to our customs. We don't have much left of our tradition. Adapt to us.
You join the RCMP, you wear their hat.
As Dillon trains, he gets hate mail and threats. But there is also support for a more diverse RCMP.
I think if somebody wants to wear something that's important to them, to their nationality or their beliefs, and it doesn't interfere with what they do, let them.
I'm happy with that. If they want to wear them, carry on.
How do you feel about the traditional image of the Mountie, you know, with the hats and that sort of thing?
It's a nice thing for the history book.
A decision has now been taken. I believe that the decision is not only correct in law, but that it is also the right decision to make.
In 1990, it is Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms that prevails. Baltej Singh Dillon may wear his turban.
What is it to be a Canadian? I think ultimately becomes, what is it to be a citizen of this earth? And Canada is, I believe, a petri dish for this world, where we have put all the organisms of this world, all the people of this world, and we're growing and coming together and living in harmony. And we are a test sample. And how we do as a country is going to be judged globally.
In 1980, the country is captivated by a stubborn young man who begins a journey that will take him into Canadian mythology. Terry Fox is only 22 and determined to raise funds to fight the cancer that took his leg. He will not live to complete his journey, but Terry Fox will become a symbol of hope. In the year of Terry Fox's run, the country has grown to 25 million. It is the year that O Canada is officially declared the national anthem. It is the time Canadians see the beginning of a technological revolution that will usher in a new world. A new world that enters the lives of many Canadians not as a revolution, but as a toy. 12-year-old James Schmaltz longs for something almost nobody in Canada owns in 1980. A personal computer. He saves up his newspaper route money and convinces his parents to buy one of the first home computers on the market.
They saw it as something complex to learn from. An educational type of thing. And we were looking at it for fun games to play and making our own games, which we did.
Across North America, teenagers are mesmerized and adults are concerned.
Well, you can cause a good deal of inflammation in this joint and this joint simply from coming down almost like the hammer on a piano.
The microchip that powers video games is about to launch a social transformation. It will sweep away old ways of work. As this tiny rectangle of sand and wire expands its power, the computer moves into factories, homes, and offices.
What does it leave you free to do?
It leaves me free. While it's printing, I can answer the phone. I can do other little chores that I have to do while it's printing. Otherwise, I would be just typing.
Does it make your job less boring?
Oh, it's exciting. I really like it.
Through the 1980s, technology changes the day-to-day lives of Canadians. Consumers are deluged with new products that promise to make life easier. There are predictions of a 4-day work week before the end of the century. The dawn of a leisure society. In 1983, Time magazine chooses as its Man of the Year a machine. But there is another side to the computer revolution. Madeleine Grignon has been a telephone operator since 1947. When an automated system is introduced in Saint-Agathe-des-Monts, Quebec, she and 40 colleagues are out of work.
That is why there is so much unemployment now. Technology. A woman with a family couldn't move to another city to work. It changed too much, too fast.
There are stories of factories in Japan run entirely by computerized robots. In Canada, a secret government report in 1983 predicts that up to half of all manufacturing jobs will disappear by the end of the decade. These are alarming statistics for workers at the Inglis plant in Toronto, where people still assemble parts by hand. Many fear technology will take away their jobs. But union leader Mike Hirsch thinks the factory needs technology to keep up.
That was a concern for the union, that there was no new technology. Because we'd heard that there was new technology being introduced elsewhere, and we thought, well, how can they be competitive in this joint?
As a child, James Schmaltz began a lifelong obsession with computer games, playing them and inventing his own. At age 24, he has a degree in engineering, a job offer, and a dilemma.
I was deciding between this really great job and basically living in poverty to make my next game. I just remember my father saying, you know, it would be a big mistake if I didn't take this real job.
James Schmaltz, fixated on his games, turns down the engineering job. Soon his father doesn't have to worry. The boy who put his newspaper route money towards the family's first computer will sell his next game for more than $1 million. He will become one of a new breed of entrepreneurs, many working in fields that didn't exist when the 1980s began. On a peaceful summer morning, a familiar drone approaches. For decades, insecticides have been sprayed over the forests of New Brunswick.
But to New Brunswickers these days, one of the finest sights in the sky is the little spray plane with its deadly cargo of DDT.
By the late 1970s, this noise has become ominous. In New Brunswick, there is a possible link between chemical sprays and children's deaths.
Everybody was concerned about the forests. Who was going to be concerned about the people and their health in this province?
Now, Nova Scotia is planning an insecticide program to combat budworm. But the forest companies who want to spray as much as 2 million acres of Cape Breton will face a fight from an unexpected source.
Phenitrathion, organophosphate.
In her family's diner in Margery Harbor, a 22-year-old waitress prepares for battle.
I just had to work damn hard and be way more creative than they were. We cared more about it than they did. It was their job, and it was our life.
I'd like to introduce Miss Elizabeth May.
With a head full of statistics and a homemade flip chart, Elizabeth May takes the first steps of a lifetime crusade.
Now, in 1952 in New Brunswick, they had a budworm epidemic. There was an epidemic in 1952 in New Brunswick. There was an epidemic in 1952 in Cape Breton. We didn't spray in Cape Breton, and the epidemic collapsed on its own. They sprayed it. Yes, it did in 1952.
The forest industry warns that without spraying, 2,000 jobs will disappear. Despite the threat, most Cape Bretoners steadfastly oppose spraying.
I don't think that it's insignificant that when the final tally was done, that over 6,000 people wrote the government that they were against spraying, and only 18 wrote that they were for.
A growing environmental movement is disrupting industries Canadians have long depended on. Frank Beeben is a logger working on South Moresby off the coast of British Columbia.
The whole income of our country comes from places like this, the actual logging and mining and fishing. That's where it comes from, and it has to continue.
His company has the right to log here, but environmentalists join the Haida Indians in a battle to preserve an ancient rainforest.
You're blocking the road. You're breaking the law. Would you please stand aside and let us through?
For now, the loggers will continue, but the fight for South Moresby is not over. Across the country, Canadians are becoming alarmed about their land and their lakes. water poisoned by acid rain, a hole discovered in the ozone layer, oceans plundered, landfill sites overflowing. The Earth seems increasingly fragile, and Canadians realize they have a responsibility. In Kitchener, Ontario, a new program quickly achieves a 90% participation rate. It is Canada's first citywide recycling program. Soon, curbside recycling boxes are a familiar sight across Canada. Environmental groups that began on the fringes of Canadian society become more mainstream. But for Elizabeth May, now a law student, it's still a cause running on donations and volunteers.
And we've had such wonderful care from everybody here. I want to thank Victoria Rose Flower Shop for sending us flowers, and I want to thank, I think it's Mr. McDougall in East Bay who's been sending us lasagna.
Grassroots environmentalism seems incompatible with big government. But poll after poll in the 1980s tells government that Canadians see the environment as a top priority. Elizabeth May, now a lawyer, gets a phone call from Federal Environment Minister Tom McMillan.
He needed a real, live, honest-to-God environmentalist working right in his own office.
In her new job, Elizabeth May is quickly swept up in the campaign for South Moresby, off the British Columbia coast. More and more people are fighting to preserve this unique wilderness, home to giant cedar and irreplaceable history. Elizabeth May realizes she can contribute in a new way.
I'm the only one in this whole movement at this point who really knows how the system works. I know what these departments do. I know what a deputy minister does. And I know what the Privy Council office is.
McMillan's office receives more letters about South Moresby than any other single issue.
I'm overwhelmed. It's just breathtakingly beautiful. I think it should be saved. And I'm eager to work with those who share my view.
In 1988, South Moresby is declared a National Park Reserve. For the Haida who live here, for environmentalists, for Elizabeth May, it is a time for celebration. Elizabeth May's job with the Environment Ministry ends after 2 years. She resigns when the government approves 2 potentially harmful dams in Saskatchewan. There will be other battles ahead. She will continue her life's work as she began, on the front lines of the environmental movement.
We lived not far from the longhouse itself, and you could hear the drums at night. The drums made me curious, a little frightened, but curious at the same time.
As a child in Kanesatake, Quebec, Ellen Gabriel absorbed her grandmother's stories about stolen Indian land. Gabriel is part of a generation that will try to claim that land back. The demands will come from every part of the country. It's Treaty Day in Fort Good Hope in the Northwest Territories. People are lining up for their payments, agreed to in the 1921 treaty. George Erasmus is a Dene who has researched these treaties. He is convinced his people still own the land.
We really believe that the land belonged to the Dene, and that the Dene had never given up the right to govern the land. And what's there? The territorial government, an arm of the federal government, is administering federal authority illegally.
George Erasmus and other young Dene want to control their own lives and the land they live on. The two are inseparable for Erasmus.
Without renewable resources to harvest, we lose both our livelihood and our way of life.
But in the mid-1970s, oil and gas companies push north, hoping to develop Canada's last frontier.
I am Judge Berger, and I am conducting an inquiry.
The proposed gas pipeline through the Mackenzie Valley threatens a way of life for 7 Dene tribes and the Inuit of the Western Arctic. Thomas Berger visits communities throughout the valley and listens. George Erasmus tells him the Dene people have declared themselves a nation.
We're simply stating the same position that our people have always had. Our people have never given up the right to govern themselves. Our people have never given up this land.
Calling for a radical change in the...
For many Canadians, watching the Berger inquiry is the first time they hear Native concerns voiced by the people themselves. In the spring of 1977, Berger makes his recommendation.
It is my conviction that the social impact on the Native people will be devastating. I think the economic benefits to Northerners generally will be limited.
The Dene learned that they could actually be actors in their own history again.
Through the 70s and 80s, a new confidence builds among Aboriginal communities. In Ganasataki, Quebec, Ellen Gabriel begins to explore her Mohawk roots through art.
When I was in my early 20s, I really started making a point of reflecting my culture, reflecting who I am, looking for Indian faces or symbols, and that eventually evolved into researching my own roots.
In Red Sucker Lake, Manitoba, Chief Elijah Harper is part of a new wave of university-educated leaders. He wants to help his struggling community and decides to work within the political system. In 1981, he runs as an NDP candidate for the Manitoba legislature.
In the city, you are followed by the media and you know that people are being informed. But people in the north don't have that. I have to explain to them that I am running for the NDP and that there will be different colors on the ballot for each party. Parties don't mean much to them in a political or philosophical sense.
Harper becomes the first Treaty Indian in the Manitoba legislature. He is new to the halls of power, but one day Elijah Harper will have a memorable impact on the politics of the country.
We are not extremists.
During the 1980s, government and Native leaders meet face-to-face to discuss land claims and Native self-government.
The reality has been that we have not been recognized in one shape.
George Erasmus is here, representing the Dene. But 3 First Ministers' conferences through the 80s achieve little. Now head of the Assembly of First Nations, Erasmus delivers a warning.
We say, Canada, if you do not deal with this generation of leaders and seek peaceful solutions, then we cannot promise that you are going to like the kind of violent political action that we can just about guarantee the next generation is going to bring to you.
There have already been aggressive tactics to bolster land claims.
Move aside.
The Haida in the Queen Charlotte Islands, British Columbia. The Temeagama Anishinaabe in Temagami, Ontario.
This road is closed forever.
The Lubicon in Little Buffalo, Alberta. But the most dramatic showdown is over a disputed piece of land outside Montreal near the town of Oka. The Mohawks of Ganasataki are protesting the planned expansion of a golf course on territory they claim. This protest explodes into a national crisis.
Coming in.
A police officer is killed.
Come on.
Horrified Canadians watch as soldiers face off with armed combatants from the Militant Warrior Society.
Wow, you watch out with your men. Hey, hey!
Ellen Gabriel is with her people behind the barricades, and soon she's in the spotlight.
The Sûreté du Québec is still not honoring the precondition arrangement that was signed.
I think Aboriginal people really strongly identify with what was happening here. And they said, yeah, something like that has happened to us.
Hey!
Maybe not to that extreme, but we recognize that pain.
Push it back, leave it!
In Ottawa, George Erasmus refuses to condemn the Mohawks of Ganasataki.
And we never want to see the army used on our people ever again.
After 78 tense days, the standoff ends. But discontent and frustration among Aboriginal groups does not. During the decade, just a handful of claims are settled, out of hundreds. And other voices echo the warning that Native concerns must be addressed, or Canadian governments will pay the price. Karen Klein is preparing for two special events in May of 1990. One is the Spring Formal at Our Lady of Lourdes High School in Guelph, Ontario.
This dance was very important to me as one of our last formal school functions, before we all went many different ways.
The second special event of the spring is a class trip to Montreal.
Is this the end of Meech Lake? Does it have a chance at all now?
I still say that Canada does improve Quebec and we should be fighting to keep them. Just let it go.
Soon, the 21 Guelph students will meet with Quebecers their own age. They will debate a subject that is taking the country on a roller coaster ride, a controversial deal known as the Meech Lake Accord. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney has come to power determined to get what Pierre Trudeau did not: Quebec's signature on the Constitution. He vows to have Quebec participate with honor and enthusiasm. On a chilly spring day in 1987, on the shores of Meech Lake near Ottawa, the Prime Minister and 10 premiers achieve what seemed impossible. A unanimous deal to revise Canada's constitution.
This has been a good day for Canada and Canadians.
Premier Robert Bourassa is satisfied Quebec's demands have been met, including a clause recognizing his province as a distinct society.
It's an historic breakthrough for Quebec as a Canadian partner.
For Quebec student Martin Labonté, the Meech Lake Accord stirs an interest in politics for the first time.
I had confidence in Bourassa, who was someone moderate and who had set only the minimal conditions, and also in Brian Mulroney, who had the courage to attempt to solve the national issue.
Parliament and legislatures have a 3-year deadline to pass the Meech Lake Accord.
You don't think ratification is a formality then?
Oh no, I would suspect there will be a great deal of debate. I hope so.
From retirement, Pierre Trudeau dismisses the accord as a total bungle and Brian Mulroney as a weakling. The federal government, he says, is giving away too much power to the provinces. Native leaders like Elijah Harper are angry the accord doesn't recognize the place of Aboriginal people.
We are a nation. It takes nations to make treaties. So why were we not involved in the creation of a constitution for this nation?
The Reform Party's Preston Manning opposes the idea of a distinct society. He wants the Constitution to emphasize equality of all provinces. And many Canadians resent the closed-door negotiations that led to the deal. Lawyer Mary Eberts is frustrated that, once again, Canadians were not consulted.
I was mad that they had learned so little from the experience of the Charter of Rights, that they had tried to go back to treating us as if Canadians had no interest in our Constitution, and as if they would sit quietly by while the deal cut by a bunch of bureaucrats and politicians was forced down our throats.
As the uproar over Meech Lake grows, Martin Labonté is in Vancouver for an English-language immersion program. Far from his home in Abitibi, Quebec, he realizes some people view him as an outsider.
2 kids spat in our direction because we were talking French. That was the moment I felt that tensions were high in Canada during the Meech Lake negotiations. It was also the moment that I understood for the first time in my life that we were different from the rest of Canada because of our language.
Karen Klein and the rest of the high school students from Guelph arrive in Montreal as the Meech debate is at its height.
On veut qu'on dise qu'on puisse dire nous sommes Québécois avant de dire on est Canadien.
Karen Klein supports Meech Lake, but realizes the issues are more complex here than in her classroom in Guelph.
You couldn't separate the success or failure of the Meech Lake Accord from the looming threat of separation. It was very hard to. Those were not 2 separate issues.
To add to the growing tension, provincial elections have brought new players into the game. Frank McKenna of New Brunswick wants to rewrite the deal. Clyde Wells gets the Newfoundland legislature to revoke its approval of the accord.
We've got to make some significant changes in Meech Lake, and I will do whatever is necessary to make sure that those changes are made, or Meech Lake as it is now does not go into effect.
By now, some of the deal's keenest supporters are disheartened. Lucien Bouchard, Mulroney's Quebec lieutenant, is fed up with his own party's attempts to dilute the deal.
Et je me vois contraint de quitter le gouvernement, avec douleur, avec déchirement, aussi bien que les caucus conservateurs, pour siéger comme député indépendant.
At the conference in Montreal, the students reach the same impasse as the politicians.
On perd à rien d'essayer. Ça fait depuis la Confédération, on est ensemble, ça marche pas toujours. Là, pourquoi qu'on n'essayerait pas de... s'essayer de séparer, puis voir qu'est-ce que ça va avoir l'air.
The apparent inevitability of separation really bothers me. It's almost like people are giving up. We fought with each other since the beginning of our relationship together as French and English Canadian citizens.
June 1990, the final deadline looms.
We are distinct! We are distinct!
After months of friction and acrimony, the end comes quietly from a soft-spoken politician holding an eagle feather.
Is the will of the House to sit beyond 12:30? No, there is no leave.
In the Manitoba legislature, Elijah Harper uses procedural loopholes to stall the debate on Meech.
We are fighting for our rightful place in Canadian society and also fighting for democracy.
The clock runs out. The Meech Lake Accord is dead. In Quebec, a solemn Robert Bourassa makes his position clear.
Le Québec est aujourd'hui et pour toujours une société distincte, libre et capable d'assumer son destin et son développement. Merci.
I want you to say Lac Meech. Okay, 3. Lac Meech Lake!
The national debate over Meech Lake has sharpened Karen Klein's appetite for learning about her country. She will go on to study Canadian politics and history in university. The country's political drama has also affected Martin Labonté. From Vancouver, he watches the Saint-Jean-Baptiste parade in Montreal just after Meech Lake dies.
It was a double emotion, of disappointment and of national pride. I watched it on television, and I was proud to see everyone marching in the streets, standing up for themselves.
Support for sovereignty swells. Martin Labonté was just 10 years old the first time his province held a referendum. But there will soon be another, and Martin Labonté will vote for sovereignty. At Valley City Furniture in Dundas, Ontario, Bob Crockford sees the future.
We drew a circle around Dundas, which was about 500 miles, to see how far you could drive in a day, or where you could fly in about an hour and a half.
Bob Crockford discovers 106 million people live in cities within the circle.
This was a real eye-opener, because we were used to flying to Edmonton to get a high school job, or flying to Calgary, or out to Moose Jaw and Gimli, Manitoba, and all manner of other places. And suddenly, we realized that it was closer to Dallas than it was to Regina.
By 1988, most of Bob Crockford's furniture is sold to the United States. His family business and its longtime employees depend on this new market.
Sure they'd seal your heart away.
For more than a century, Canadians have struggled with a fundamental question. Should Canada seek closer ties to the United States or forge its own economic destiny? Prime Minister Brian Mulroney favors a close relationship.
The Free Trade Agreement is going to secure 2 million jobs in Canada and is going to create 250,000 new ones. The Free Trade Agreement is the positive option that will give Canadians the opportunity to stand tall and compete with the very best in the world.
Canada and the U.S. carve out a detailed agreement that will see trade barriers gradually shrink. At Toronto's Inglis factory, workers worry about what the free trade agreement means for them. The average age at the plant is 47, the average seniority 17 years. Union President Mike Hirsch values the life and culture that extend beyond the shop floor.
Like a family, we love and hate, you know, but we spend more time with each other than we do with our own families.
Now the Inglis plant has been bought by an American company, Whirlpool. Mike Hirsch has heard that jobs will soon go south.
Newspapers were saying there would be jobs elsewhere. But people working 20 years in a factory with grade 9 education didn't think they were going to get those jobs.
The free trade agreement becomes the single most divisive issue of the heated 1988 election campaign. Liberal leader John Turner vows that if he's elected, he'll rip up the deal.
We built a country, east and west and north. We built it on an infrastructure that deliberately resisted the continental pressure of the United States. For 120 years, we've done it. With one signature of a pen, you've reversed that, thrown us into the north-south influence of the United States, and will reduce us, I'm sure, to a colony of the United States, because when the economic levers go, the political independence is sure to follow.
Mr. Turner, with a document that's cancelable on 6 months' notice, be serious.
The question of Canada's independence becomes the crucial focus of the debate. In Montreal, political cartoonist Terry Mosher, known as Aislinn, sees the fight as a romantic struggle to save the soul of Canada from big business.
We tapped into something where people were very nervous about Mulrooney and didn't trust him. And certainly the cartoons helped that fear.
Artists, intellectuals, social groups, and unions send their message to 2 million homes. On the pro-free trade side, the Business Council on National Issues delivers its pitch in newspapers across the country. 8 of 10 premiers endorsed the deal, including the leaders of Quebec and Alberta. At Valley City, Bob Crockford urges his employees to consider voting Conservative.
A 15% duty applied to our products would have a very serious detrimental effect on employment.
Have you ever voted Tory before? But you're thinking about it this time.
Yeah, I'm thinking.
Crockford believes Canada must embrace free trade or be left behind.
You want an example of countries that don't trade with the world? Take a look at North Korea and Albania. You like that? Terrific. You happen to like better cars, better food, better hospitals, and all the rest of it? Then free trade is the direction.
That I'm saying to Canadians, wake up. It's not too late. Join our crusade. We have to defeat this deal.
After they've torn up the free trade agreement, ask them what they're going to do for you and for your jobs.
For many Canadians, it's frustratingly difficult to sort out the competing claims.
People are confused.
They have been trying to market free trade in Canada. They have not been trying to cover the issues.
At the end of the intense campaign, the Conservatives win the day with help from strong majorities in Alberta and Quebec. Opponents point out that more Canadians voted for the 2 opposition parties, but Brian Mulroney now has his second majority government. Free trade will become law. As more and more tariff barriers fall, Bob Crockford's family business prospers. His company will win contracts to build furniture for American courthouses. But for workers at Inglis, a way of life is definitively over. The year the free trade deal comes into force is the year the Inglis plant shuts down forever.
My whole life was about Inglis and the appliance industry. I mean, that's all. That's everything I knew. And it's gone.
For older workers with little education, prospects are bleak.
Schooling, I don't think will be any good to me. I don't think you have to be trained to serve hamburgers, and I think that's about the only job I could get right now.
The free trade deal was just the final blow for this plant. The world is changing as technology alters the landscape, as globalization shapes the new economy, as the industrial age gives way to the information age. A few years later, Mike Hirsch has a new job, retraining laid-off workers. When Inglis closed, the union tried to retrain as many people as it could.
I ran into one guy who took computer training. He looked great. He said he was teaching computers, had a good job. And I was really glad for him.
Others never work again.
There were winners and losers. Most of them did okay, not with secure jobs or high-paying jobs, but they're employed, and that's something.
For some Canadians, a foothold in a new world. Lives affected by the grand sweep of events. It is hard to see history close up. It is distance that reveals meaning. Our story of Canada and its people ends here, as the 1990s begin, as the country approaches the dawn of a new century. As the 1980s drew to a close, Canadians watched the Berlin Wall collapse. They saw new democracies rise. They witnessed an ancient nation tilt between protest and power. As Canada heads into a new era, lives will be transformed and laws rewritten. This land will define itself again and again, as it has from the beginning. The future is not a place. It is not a fixed point on a navigation chart. It is instead an ever-shifting destination, constantly changed by the journey itself and by the people who make it. "15,000 years ago, the first travelers came to this continent, which became the destination for countless generations. The place where 1,000,000 epic journeys ended and 1,000,000 new stories began. Before there was Rome, before Babylon, This land became home to more than 50 nations, peoples with their own languages, laws, and gods.
There's a giant that lives in the north. When he blows his breath, violent snowstorms occur. Other spirits live to the east and west. The thunder is the noise of them running across the sky.
"400 years ago, carried by billowing sails from France, came the next journey of the adventurers. The landless and the dreamers, who would unlock a continent and forge a new world people.
Anyone who considers to what extent the Canadiens are alert, joyful, courageous, able to withstand any hardship, that person must also foresee that Canada will soon become an extremely powerful country.
Canada became the battlefield of empires. It was pulled into a decade of revolution, which unleashed the largest human journey in the continent's history.
I climbed to the top of Chipman's Hill and watched the sails disappear. Although I had not shed a tear throughout all the war, I sat down on the damp moss with my baby in my lap and cried.
And they kept coming. The jobless from Scotland, the landless from Ireland, the dispossessed of Europe. And they have been followed ever since by families searching for opportunity and sanctuary. Every strand is still here. This history is still in play. The homelands of the first peoples, the future of the French and the English, the newcomers who have shaped our century, the eternal dynamic with the United States. Language and culture, legacy and land, political power and identity, confederation or secession. Our place in the emerging global constellations. Every story you have seen is still evolving. You are creating it now. There are young people watching now who will retell this story one day.
Action.
Informed by their needs, their perspectives, and their time.
You don't have to fix it.
When they do, the voices and the images will be of men, women, and children who are among you now. Whether you know it or not, you are all living an epic drama.